Chapter 11. The Power of Evolution. 5. No. 03. PAL. Race, Skeleton Warrior. Gender, Skeleton Warrior. Gender, Specialty, Defense and Bone Solidity. 1. 5. Sun PAL. Physique 1. Sun 5. No. 09. Train as Race, Clay Golem. Gender, Specialty, Striking, Strength 1. 5. Physique 1. $15. Race, Trained, Mine, Specialty, Vine Binding, Fine Binding, Vine Binding 20. Fine, Sick, 6, 6. $1. 6, 6, 6. 5. This was different from the time when he picked out the goblins, because there wasn't a variety of species, so all he had to do was pick one out of the three. There were, of course, pros and cons to each one. The skeleton warrior was about 2 meters tall, and as an undead, they didn't require food. Since their body was made out of bones, other than their bones breaking, they won't really get injured. Their main weapons were a sword and shield, and although it made them look like a klutz, they were wearing a helmet and armor. Because of this, it made them look like your ordinary tanker. However, in order to maintain them, it required a lot of mana. The dungeons solely relied on Yong-ho, so getting a skeleton warrior was too much for him to handle. The clay golem was made out of clay, like their name stated. Like the skeleton warrior, they didn't require food, and the amount of mana it took to maintain them was lower than the skeleton warrior. They were almost 3 meters tall. Since they had broad shoulders, they would be able to block paths. The downside was that their movements were slow, but when thinking about using them to defend themselves, it wasn't a big issue. They'll end up sitting in the middle of the road within the dungeon and endure the enemy's attacks. The clay golem looked as if it was created by a child, and it didn't use any weapons. The last spirit was the treant. It was a tree monster that had its face right in the center of the bark, and the vines were extended out like arms and legs. Out of the three, this spirit had the largest figure. The vines extended out above its head as well, so it was difficult to determine how tall they were, but they were definitely over 3 meters. Its body was so thick that 2 grown men wouldn't be able to completely hug it. Since it could plant itself into the ground like an ordinary tree, they didn't require food. All they needed was a decent amount of nutrients and water, and since they were a spirit that lived in the dungeon, they didn't require a lot of sunlight. Mobility is an issue though. Its mobility was worse than the clay golem, but the fact that it can move the vines like a tentacle all throughout the dungeon was charming. If it planted itself in the middle of a walkway, it can extend its vines and create a strong shield. The golem, or the treant, without their special skill, they would be nothing more than an ordinary spirit. But since they both had different skills, Yong-ho had to choose based on their specialty and stats. Yong-ho looked between the 2 spirits. He saw their development route and imagined how compatible they would be with Catalina Seconds. Later, Yong-ho made his decision. He opened his eyes after it twitched a bit. He raised his dizzy head and came back to his senses. Near him, he saw Catalina and Eligor looking at him worriedly. Haha. He had no energy. It felt as if he ran a 100-meter dash several times. "Sir, are you okay? Are you hurt somewhere?" Catalina carefully asked while wiping the sweat off of Yong-ho's forehead with a handkerchief. Eligor also spoke with a worried expression. "You've used too much of your mana, and you also stayed at virtual space for too long." Instead of answering, Yong-ho was catching his breath. After Catalina wiped off the sweat, he took a step back and spoke. His throat was pretty dry. "How long was I there?" "About 2 hours," Eligor answered immediately. Yong-ho closed his eyes again and sat on the throne. When the cold stone touched his body, he felt better. "I used too much mana." The fact that he spent 2 hours in that place wasn't the issue. The problem was that after he evolved the 2 goblins, he used the power of evolution to observe the spirits. "I have a long way to go." Yong-ho was contemplating about his development route, but it seemed like he had to increase his mana first. After catching his breath more, he opened his eyes. He saw the 2 goblins, who were mumbling their names, and Catalina and Eligor. He looked at them one by one and then smiled. Even though they were worried about his condition, it was obvious that they wanted to ask about the spirits that he purchased. However, since the owner's body wasn't in the best condition, they held back. Yong-ho spoke with a smile. "The treant is what I purchased." Catalina and Eligor didn't react right away. Catalina blinked her large eyes, and Eligor asked with a shocked expression, "Sir, The Treant is a rank 2 spirit. Do you know who I am? I'm the demon king that obtained the power of greed. Yong-ho explained everything that happened between him and Citri. There was no need to hide it from them. And there was a need to share this information since both Catalina and Eligor belonged to the dungeon. The fact that Citri liked him has become a big help, but Yong-ho couldn't completely trust her. He couldn't completely open up to her in order to gain something that only lasted for a moment. Eligor. I used half of the money that was registered into the dungeon shop. Since I purchased 2 additional goblins, it'll increase the development speed. They gave me a skeleton for free for purchasing a lot. When Yong-ho spoke with a smile, Eligor looked as if he was deeply moved. He knew what Eligor was going to do next, so Yong-ho decided to intercept. He stood up from the throne and spoke. I'm excited for the next delivery. Shall we eat? Even though he spoke confidently, his body reacted differently. Before he could finish talking, his legs started shaking and almost caused him to collapse. Catalina quickly rushed to his side and helped him up, and Yong-ho saw Catalina's worried face. He couldn't help but smile. You're definitely more comfortable. He was able to read her thoughts just from seeing her expression. Even though they were both beautiful, Catalina's mentality was a lot healthier than Citri's. It's nothing, you're just cute. 3 days ago, he had trouble just looking at her face because she was beautiful. As Yong-ho shook his head, he leaned his body against hers even more. Yong-ho spoke to Eligor and the goblins that were watching from behind. Anyways, let's eat. Let's eat and rest. There was no need to push himself any further. Eligor, Catalina, and even the goblins quickly started their tasks. It's been 3 days since the new owner entered the House of Mammon. The House of Mammon's dungeon was regaining its past glory. It was a small amount, and very slowly but surely it was regaining it. Chapter 12. Laws exist within the demon world. But one can't expect the demon world to have laws as a civilized nation. No, even in advanced countries, they used cruel violence instead of the law. The law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. In the demon world, a fist was more powerful than the law. It didn't matter to low-ranked spirits like goblins. As the lowest being in the pyramid, they were satisfied with just being alive. However, as the demon king and the owner of the spirits, it was a different story. They needed to get stronger in order to survive. It wasn't a choice, but a necessity. Yong-ho was breathing heavily while sweating. After awakening as a demon king, his body did get stronger, but he didn't become a flawless Superman. The room that was located in front of the demon king's room, Yong-ho leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. He used the trick that Catalina taught him on how to circulate the mana that was within his body. It was safe to say that a demon king's body was a lump of mana. Just circulating the mana that was within his body will resolve the fatigue that his body was feeling. Do they not get tired? Yong-ho had a bitter smile on his face as he looked straight ahead. His soldier, Catalina, and the rank 2 spirit, Treant, were currently sparring with each other. You won't be able to beat me if you keep that up. Catalina spoke as if she was making fun of them. Her opponent was the Treant that planted its roots in the middle of the room. Catalina's act of provocation was more effective because it was different from her usual clumsy personality. Her attack was fast and sharp. Honestly, Yong-ho didn't have the confidence to dodge that attack. On top of that, there were no less than 4 vines. However, Catalina maintained her smile. Instead of stepping back and dodging them, she ran towards the vines. The way she dodged the vines was so natural that it looked like he was seeing a feather ride the wind. As she got closer, the Treant tried to attack, but it was no use. After jumping off of the ground, Catalina disappeared. Or, that's what it looked like in their eyes. After breathing in, Catalina appeared again. She appeared behind the spirit, and using the sheathed sword that was in her hand, she gently tapped the Treant's body. With this, it's 10-0. If the Treant grabbed or touched Catalina with their vines, it was their win. If Catalina dodges the vines and touches the Treant's body, then Catalina wins. It was a very simple rule, and like Catalina had mentioned, this was her 10th win. Catalina was spinning around with a smile while the Treant was shaking in anger. After seeing Yong-ho, she bowed politely. She looked like a magician that bowed to the audience after performing their magic trick. Even though Catalina had a clumsy side, That was just one part of her. The House of Mammon was still a family, even if they experienced a downfall. Catalina was the guard of this house and had the skills to match it. But why am I in a bad mood? No, to be exact, he wasn't in a bad mood. It's more like he could relate to the treant more than Catalina. Catalina had a calm face, while her ears were flapping, and was waiting for Yong-ho to compliment her. But Yong-ho saw how defeated the treant looked. I will definitely try. No, I'll evolve your vines. Hang in there, treant. You'll beat her next time. Before that, Yong-ho had to develop himself first. It's been 6 days since he became the head of the house. Catalina has been teaching Yong-ho how to fight during the past 3 days. Since he's never fought before, it wasn't easy, however. He wasn't being lazy about his training. Have you gotten used to the training? He wiped off the sweat using the water that was in the room, and when he walked out, Eligor greeted him with a smile. The clothes that Eligor brought were ordinary clothes that he bought from the dungeon shop and was made for human-like spirits. It was an ordinary grey outfit that didn't have any designs. Yong-ho changed into them and answered, "Somewhat. It's kind of fun moving my body around. I was worried about Catalina's training, but it's a relief that you're very smart." This is a blessing from Mammon himself. Eligor must have not trusted her as well. With a bitter smile, he followed Eligor to the king's room. It was to see how the goblins were working. There was a total of 4 goblins within the dungeon. John was the one that specialized in strength, and Ron specialized in stamina. The 2 additional goblins that he purchased haven't been developed yet since he had to save his mana, but they specialized in agility and intellect. He didn't know what kind of development would be most effective for goblins, so he chose them in order to gather data. Of course, the warehouse would be the first place. The first thing the goblins did was building the warehouse. It was called a warehouse, but it was just a room, and after activating it, all they did was stack various resources. Eligor started explaining while pointing to various wood and stones. In some ways, the dungeon itself is another spirit. You cannot install all the facilities with just mana alone. You need wood, stone, metals, and other ingredients as well. The dungeon shops sell these ingredients, but if we can obtain them from around us, that'll be better. They needed to save as much as possible. Yong-ho asked after looking at the materials again, "What are you thinking about building next?" "You'll be the one to decide, but I personally would like to suggest building a prison." A prison? It was something he hadn't thought about, so he couldn't help but ask loudly. Eligor answered calmly, "Yes, it's safe to say that there aren't any dungeons that doesn't have a prison." The games that Yong-ho played had dungeons as well. No, when he thought about the word dungeon, not having a prison seemed odd. No, but still, a prison is used to lock up prisoners. There's really no reason to that, right? He doubted they could capture a prisoner now, and on top of that, he was busy taking care of the others. Eligor had a bright smile on his face. "Oh, so you won't let the prisoners have a chance to live. It's the right thing to say as the Demon King, and this old man has been touched." Instead of contemplating about what he said, a frown appeared on his face. Eligor continued talking. "A prison isn't just used to keep prisoners in. It can be used as a punishment for spirits. In order to control feeble-minded spirits, like the goblins, you need both carrot and stick." Yong-ho briefly thought about how the goblins and Catalina would cry if they were put in the prison and nodded his head. He still wasn't sure if it was necessary, but Eligor knew more about the dungeon and the demon world, so his judgment was most likely correct. "Okay, then begin the construction. Also, give me data on the types of traps and dungeon facilities that can be created in our current situation. I'll check when I come back." Eligor briefly wondered what he meant when he said he would check when he came back. He asked with a bright expression, "Will you be starting today?" "Might as well start as soon as possible. I already told Catalina to get ready. Since we're just starting, it probably won't be that dangerous." Most of the functions within the dungeon were inactive. The activated functions didn't even make up 10 of the inactive functions. And if he considered the underground area, the current dungeon was just the tip of the iceberg. Because of that, he needed to explore the dungeon. It was to acquire the House of Mammon's hidden inheritance. It's a bit odd that in putting my life on the line to explore my own place. Out of the previous owners, not one of them were able to completely reactivate the dungeon because it was too big. However, this wasn't the only reason. Exploring the dungeon was dangerous. Within the dungeon, a good amount of Mammon's inheritance was hidden, and at the same time, unknown traps existed as well. High risk, high return. Yong-ho made the decision to recover the House of Mammon's power. Him not planning on overdoing it from the start though. First, he was planning on reactivating the areas that the previous owners discovered, and then decided to grow his mana and gain experience in the development skill. He could explore the depths of the dungeon after he gets stronger. In that case, there's a place I would like for you to visit first. It's been 6 days since the dungeon has been reactivated, so I'm sure it has regained its form. Yong-ho tilted his head. Regained its form? What are you talking about? Eligor had a soft smile on his face. After Yong-ho ascended to the throne, he was informed about it on the first day, but it was a place he never visited. It's the core of the dungeon. I'm talking about the heart of the dungeon, Chapter 13. In the Demon King's room behind the throne there's a door. When he pushed the curtain to the side, a small but sturdy door appeared. As I've explained before, the dungeon isn't simply a building, but a living being that you can call a spirit. Like the name suggests, the heart of the dungeon is the heart of all living things. It provides mana instead of blood. When Yong-ho added to his explanation, Eligor smiled and answered, "That's correct." The room that the heart of the dungeon was located wasn't different from the other rooms. It was a square room that was dark and hard. One thing that was different was that in the middle of the room, on top of a shabby altar, there was a large marble. It was a large green marble that was a bit bigger than a human's head. As the owner that's connected to the dungeon's spirit, Yong-ho realized something as soon as he looked at the marble. I knew it. That was the heart of the dungeon. "Hello, master," the spirit of the dungeon spoke as if they were waiting for him. Since this was the heart of the dungeon, he expected the spirit to appear as a hologram, but he only heard their voice. Yong-ho suppressed his disappointment and asked the spirit, "Is that marble your main body?" "Yes, sir. It's small now, but it will become larger soon." Yong-ho walked closer to the marble. Inside the emerald-colored marble, there was a flame that was dancing inside it. Eligor, who was quietly watching him from behind, spoke. "There are many different ways to grow the dungeon, but in the end, it can be condensed into one sentence." Providing mana, Yong-ho turned around, and Eligor continued his explanation. All living things within the demon world have different levels of mana. It even applies to the low-level spirits that don't have horns, and the more horns that a spirit has, the more mana they have. We call that lump of mana extract. Yong-ho was able to sense a lot of things from Eligor. He was able to sense the emotions Eligor displayed on his face, his spirit, and the flow of his mana. The mana that flowed all throughout his body started from the center of his chest and ended there as well. When a demon family dies, the lump of mana will naturally disperse like water or wind. However, if it hasn't been that long since the family died, that mana can be recalled, and you pour that mana into the heart of the dungeon. Eligor smiled. "That's correct. You have a good understanding." He had a basic idea. If this were a game, it would be like investing into the heart of the dungeon with the experience that you gain by killing a monster. There is one simple but extreme method. When Eligor spoke, Yong-ho understood. You can extract mana from the heart of the dungeon. That's correct. That's the biggest reason why dungeon hunting or dungeon wars occur. Eligor emphasized several times about how the dungeon was a spirit. If mana can be gathered from a demon family, then it's only right for demons to be able to extract mana from the heart of the dungeon. There is a massive amount of mana that can be extracted from it. The bigger and older the dungeon is, the more massive the dungeon's mana is. What he was saying was common sense. But Yong-ho felt out of place by what he just said. He asked Eligor, "Can the mana only be extracted while the owner is still alive?" Yong-ho was getting ahead of himself, but Eligor understood. He spoke with a bright smile on his face. "You're very smart. That isn't the case. If the owner dies, then the spirit of the dungeon will die as well. However, the heart of the dungeon itself will not die." That sounds a bit odd. It's been over a year since the previous owner of the dungeon committed suicide. The mana can be extracted from the heart of the dungeon, even if the owner is dead. If what he said were true, then there was one question. How was the House of Mammon kept safe all this time? The reason why the dungeon was safe during the past year is fairly simple. Eligor approached Yong-ho. He politely pointed at the heart of the dungeon Therese, a protective film around it, and it protects the heart of the dungeon's mana. It'll require a lot of mana to break the barrier with strength. However, once the owner dies and the heart of the dungeon goes into the resting stage, the barrier will become weaker and weaker. Then, until the barrier weakens, the other owners, no, the weaker demons, are waiting for the right opportunity. That's right. Right now, this dungeon is... sorry. Even though we've fallen, the dungeon's history is well known within the demon world. Since the barrier becomes stronger depending on the dungeon's history, the weaker demons won't think about getting near it. He somewhat understood. Also, Eligor and Catalina wouldn't just stand by and watch the other demons take the mana. But he still had questions. Then, what about the other demons? A frown appeared on Eligor's face. Even though the barrier is strong, it's been a while since the dungeon fell, so there isn't much mana to extract. To them, it's weak. To the weaker demons, it was a prize worth stealing, but the barrier was too strong. To the strong owners, there wasn't much they could take, so it wasn't worth the effort. Yong-ho understood the current situation. He asked about what should be done from now on. How long does it usually take for that barrier to weaken? It's different depending on the dungeon, but usually it drops to about half after a year. If the weaker spirits were really waiting, Eligor didn't answer, but he knew what Yong-ho was thinking just from his expression. If the spirits fought against each other to get the mana, then this was the best time for them to attack the heart of the dungeon. We need to strengthen the defense as soon as possible. No matter how he thought of it, being the son of a chicken shop was better than being the owner of the House of Mammon. But he already accepted it. Instead of complaining, Yong-ho checked the things he had to do. Strengthen all 3 traps so that they'll work properly. And, like I've requested before, give me a report of all facilities and traps. Yes, Master Eligor answered with respect. After taking a deep breath, Yong-ho walked around the room that the heart of the dungeon was located. Enemies would eventually enter this place. Complaining about a future that won't change is something that a dummy would do. The only thing the owner of the dungeon can do is to do their best. Great. Shall we go look around? Yong-ho spoke energetically and walked out of the room. It was time to explore the House of Mammon's dungeon. Yong-ho crossed his arms. He looked down while standing in a slightly crooked position, and then slowly looked up again. After inspecting the figure before him, he asked, what's with that outfit? It was his guard, Catalina. She wasn't wearing her usual suit. She was wearing a black, leather pair of pants that hugged her soft skin, and she wore a pair of boots that enveloped her firm calves. She wore a piece of black, leather top that reminded him of a swimsuit, but since the top was pretty short, it revealed a part of her waist and pelvis. She wore a pair of black arm warmers, which came up right before her bare shoulders, and a small catapult was installed on her left arm, which she could use with one hand. It was fine up until here. She looked like one of those sexy female robbers that appear in games. The issue was the black hood that she wore on her head. Usually hoods would sit on top of shoulders or is connected on the back like a cape, but it only covered her neck, head, and face. Catalina carefully answered Yong-ho. He couldn't tell since it was covered by the hood, but it seemed like her ears were drooping. This is my combat gear. I see it suits you. She looked pretty in it, and since agility was important to Catalina, it was an appropriate outfit. The hood matches with the thief class. After acknowledging it, Yong-ho waved his finger and created a window of light in the air. After becoming close with the spirit of the dungeon, it was a skill he was able to use at will. The window of light displayed the dungeon's map. First, in thinking about going through the areas that the previous owners didn't activate, Yong-ho pointed at the black areas while talking. Catalina spoke carefully. But, sir, won't that be too dangerous? He knew what Catalina was worried about. But Yong-ho had made up his mind. The areas that the previous owners activated are safer. But those areas have already been looked at by the previous owners. There won't be much left, right? It was reasonable, so all Catalina could do was nod. Yong-ho looked at her and asked, "But what do you mean by dangerous?" It didn't seem like the traps were what she was worried about. Catalina hesitated for a bit, but when she made up her mind, she straightened her posture and took a deep breath. She looked straight at Yong-ho and spoke. The House of Mammon's dungeon is wide and deep. Not one of the previous owners were able to completely activate every part of the dungeon. The previous owner and the owner before that weren't able to go near the lower level. Wait, there's a lower level. The map that the spirit of the dungeon showed didn't display that. With a shocked expression, Yong-ho zoomed in on the map. No matter where he looked, there wasn't a lower level. Catalina glanced at Yong-ho and spoke. With all due respect, sir, you aren't able to control all over the dungeon with your current power, so that's why you can't see it. It's because the spirit of the dungeon relies on your strength. You're saying that I'm unable to look at the entire map yet. Instead of answering, Catalina displayed an awkward smile, and Yong-ho nodded. He asked another question. How many lower levels are there? I apologize, but I don't exactly know how many levels there are. It's not your fault. There's no need to be sorry. Just tell me everything that you know. If she were this careful every time, it would tire out the other person. Thankfully, instead of being intimidated, she answered right away. This is something I've heard from the previous guard, so I'm not sure how accurate it is, but there's at least 5 lower levels. The previous guard assumed that the lower you go, it becomes a narrower inverted triangle. The first floor was so big that it could fit 100 rooms. But if there were lower levels too, then this dungeon was extremely big. Catalina, you're not saying it's dangerous just because of the traps, right? Yes, sir. It's not because of the traps. Catalina stopped talking. It seemed like she had something important to say, because she closed her eyes momentarily and breathed in. Yong-ho became nervous just looking at her. As soon as she gulped, Catalina spoke. Mammon's spirits lie somewhere within this dungeon. Chapter 14. The Demon King Mammon's, one of the 7 deadly sins. So you're saying my ancestors? That's right. They're the spirits that Lord Mammon gathered himself. Her expression was serious, but her voice was filled with nervousness. A frown appeared on Yong-ho's face. After gulping, he asked again. Does that mean they're like you and Eligor and they belong to the dungeon? That didn't seem like the case. That's probably why she referred to them as Mammon's spirits. Instead, the House of Mammon's spirits. Did they go crazy because they were locked up for a long time, to the point where they didn't notice their owner? Since they were locked up alone in this dark dungeon somewhere, it's possible for them to become that way. But that didn't seem to be the case this time too. Catalina bit her lips. It seemed too difficult for her to say, because she spoke after thinking about how to say it. It's not that it doesn't happen at all, but there's a bigger problem. You see, Yong-ho let out a deep sigh. It wasn't because he was frustrated with her. While she was hesitating, Yong-ho started thinking and became sure after seeing her expression. They don't acknowledge the owner's Mammon's spirits. Catalina couldn't say anything and instead affirmed it through her expression and actions. Few moments later, she spoke. With all due respect, sir, there was an owner that was killed by Mammon's spirit. It's because they didn't pass the test that Mammon's spirit presented. Yong-ho closed his eyes and covered his face with his hands, and then he let out a deep sigh. He understood why the previous owners couldn't completely activate the entire dungeon, Mammon's spirits. He was one of the 7 deadly sins and controlled 14th of the demon world in the past, and those were the spirits that he himself gathered. But how are they still alive? Do they gain eternal life if they're high-ranked demons? He thought the question was weird. If high-ranked demons gained eternal life, then there's no reason for Mammon to die. Catalina answered. It's true that high-ranked demons live for a long time, but they do not gain eternal life. Most of the spirits are currently sealed. They'll fall asleep and wake up when someone is near. There are spirits where their bodies are dead and their spirits remain in the dungeon. The Demon King, Mammon, was a very possessive demon. Does that mean he kept their spirits as his underlings even after they've died? Yong-ho thought of the different funerary practices, such as a pharaoh's grave, and then shook his head. Okay, fine. Let's think positively. If I pass their test, that means I'll be able to recruit them as my underling, right? Yes, that's correct. If it's you, I'm sure you'll pass the test. I believe in you, Catalina spoke with a hopeful expression. She looked really cute, but at the same time, he felt burdened by it. Including Eligor, Catalina trusted and followed Yong-ho. He was too scared to actually try it, but if he told them to die, it felt like they would actually listen. They were wasting time standing around and talking. Yong-ho moved to the right wall from the throne and activated a room that was inactive. He spoke while moving with Catalina. I actually expected storage rooms and such. If the dungeon is really that big, there should be other things in here, right? Do you know anything about it? I heard from the previous guard that there's an arena. Arena. It was something he wasn't expecting, so Yong-ho stopped walking. Catalina stopped walking as well and started explaining. It's a location that the third owner found himself. He visited the place discreetly, so there's no information about its location, but I'm sure that it actually exists. Yong-ho started walking again. He thought for a moment and then asked, "What kind of place is it?" "One of Mammon's spirits takes care of that location. Those that enter the place will be tested based on their strength, and after proving how strong they are, they'll be awarded with one item out of the many that Mammon gathered. I heard that every time you enter, the difficulty level increases, but the rewards are that much better." It was reasonable. After walking through an empty room, Yong-ho activated another room. "The test probably requires me to fight, right?" "Possibly, I believe so." The third owner didn't leave any records, but it's called an arena. He'll be tested by fighting and will receive an award from Mammon's spirit. It's an actual arena. It was similar to the arenas that are shown in RPGs. It was impossible to get a sense of what Mammon was thinking, but what exactly was going on in their minds when they decided to build this in their own dungeon, to train the younger generation. To train the spirits, wait. While walking through the fourth room, Yong-ho stopped walking. Catalina didn't expect him to stop, so she was surprised by his action. "Master," instead of answering, Yong-ho looked at the left wall. It was an ordinary wall, but he felt something weird from it. It felt out of place. He recently felt the same thing. And just like then, his hands and feet moved on its own. Out of the 7 deadly sins, he was greed. It was a skill that he inherited. He walked towards the wall as if he was possessed by something. He touched it and figured out what that odd feeling was. The flow of mana. It was different from other locations. Yong-ho instinctively released the mana through the palm of his hand. Then something changed. The wall started shaking lightly and with a loud noise. A door that was as big as a person with a large body appeared. It was a secret door. He would be able to obtain something if he went in. That's what Yong-ho's instincts were telling him. "Shall we go in?" After Yong-ho spoke, Catalina nodded her head with a nervous expression. She approached next to him and spoke. "Then, I'll go in first." It was a decision she made as his guard. But Yong-ho shook his head. "Sorry, I feel like I should trust my instincts. I'll lead the way, so watch my back." "Is there something we can use as a light?" Catalina contemplated for a bit, but agreed with his decision. She took out a small stick that was in her leather bag and used her mana on it. It was a flashlight that was used in the demon world. "Here you go. It will become brighter if you use your mana. This is handy." Yong-ho grabbed the flashlight with a smile and turned around towards the secret door. After lighting the inside, he started walking 1 step, 2 steps, and on the 3rd step, the floor was missing. It suddenly disappeared. Yong-ho didn't have the skill to control gravity. Yong-ho suddenly fell and, like someone that was falling, he instinctively started yelling. "Master!" Catalina screamed after him. Yong-ho wasn't able to look up to Catalina. He used the flashlight to light the bottom, but he couldn't see the floor. Within the small gap, all he could see were bricks, rocks, skulls, and bugs. "Master!" He heard Catalina's voice just above his head. Yong-ho instinctively tilted his head back and saw Catalina reaching out to him. She grabbed Yong-ho. Moments later, they were both on the ground. His entire body was in pain. He must have been unconscious for a moment because he was feeling dizzy, or he could have been unconscious for a very long time. Yong-ho started coughing. He tried his best to breathe. He couldn't see anything. It was too dark, Catalina. He couldn't think clearly. He started yelling, "Catalina!" He was in pain. Moving all the muscles within his body to scream out her name was difficult. However, Yong-ho couldn't feel that pain. He was focused on something else. "Ah!" Yong-ho focused on the odd sound. The voice was close. "Catalina, master." Yong-ho now knew where the voice was coming from. It was below him. Yong-ho was surprised and quickly got up. Because of that, Catalina ended up letting out another groan. When he quickly stood up, Yong-ho let out another groan. There was pain all over his body. It seemed like nothing was broken, but it felt like there were bruises everywhere. When he managed to stand up, he tried to look at Catalina, but he couldn't see anything. The room was too dark. "Are you okay? Can you stand?" He tried his best to talk. Thankfully, she replied. This time, Master Catalina Yong-ho sat down on the ground. Once he calmed down, he looked around and noticed the flashlight sitting not too far from him. Seeing that it was still shining brightly, he probably wasn't out for that long. A little bit later, he wanted to go and grab it, but his body wasn't listening to him. While Yong-ho was catching his breath, he heard something moving in front of him. It was the sound of Catalina standing up. "Thank you, Master. You have saved me. I won't forget your kindness for as long as I live." Yong-ho tilted his head to the side without knowing. He asked in kind of a silly tone, "Huh, you don't remember? Right before we hit the ground, you hugged me." Catalina answered carefully, and Yong-ho was even more confused. It sounded like that's what he did. Most importantly, Catalina was telling the truth. Wait, then, why was I on top instead of being on the bottom? We rolled after falling. Yong-ho laughed at Catalina's assumption. "I was wondering why my entire body was aching." Unfortunately, because it happened so suddenly, he couldn't remember any of Catalina's soft body parts. After catching his breath, Yong-ho groaned as he stood up and picked up the flashlight. He turned the flashlight towards Catalina to make sure she was safe and then raised it towards the ceiling. Did we fall from up there? Checking the edge with the flashlight was impossible. It was hard to tell exactly how far they fell, but it felt like they fell over 10 meters. Catalina started talking. "I tried to slow down the speed when we fell, but I don't think I was able to achieve it. I'm sorry." The reason why Yong-ho was still alive, despite falling over 10 meters, wasn't because the Demon King's body was sturdy. When Catalina grabbed Yong-ho during the fall, she used all sorts of methods to slow down the speed. "No, I'm alive thanks to you. Thanks, you did really well." When he expressed his gratitude and complimented her, he waved his finger in the air. He wanted to acknowledge her services, but it wasn't the best time to have a conversation about it. As expected, he couldn't connect to the spirit of the dungeon. Is it because we're underground? Just how many levels did they fall? Since the roof of the first floor was pretty tall, if he calculated it using that, maybe fifth. Sixth Eligor will surely come to help us. Catalina spoke in a positive tone. Yong-ho nodded his head, and after letting out a groan, he stood up. He felt something. "I can tell if this is a blessing or a curse." Master, instead of answering, he concentrated on the feeling. The reason why he was able to find this secret passageway. A peculiar feeling that led him here. It was connected. It didn't stop. It stimulated his instincts. He quickly looked around using the flashlight. It was a small, narrow room. Unlike the rooms on the first floor, there were decorations on the walls, and in one particular direction. A thing that stimulated Yong-ho's greed. Yong-ho used the flashlight. Catalina stood up after gulping and looked in the same direction as Yong-ho. At the end of the room, there was a small altar, and something was stuck on top of it. Yong-ho spoke with a frown on his face. "A lance?" Chapter 50. It was a very fancy altar. It was dark, so it was difficult to see, but the fire revealed different patterns that were carved on the exterior of the altar, and in the center of that altar, there was a lance. It was red. The head of the lance was gold. Yong-ho started walking as if he was possessed. Catalina was surprised by his movement, as she yelled, "Master got it!" Yong-ho grabbed the lance without hesitation, and he pulled it out. Catalina held her breath. If arrows started shooting out of the walls, she was planning on throwing her body to protect him. If the fire enveloped Yong-ho, she planned on doing the same by throwing her body and shielding him. If nothing worked out, she was ready to die with him. However, nothing happened. After pulling out the lance, Yong-ho realized what he had done and was shocked moments later, but luckily, he didn't throw the spear that was in his hand, and there was silence. Yong-ho kept on looking back and forth between the lance and the altar because nothing was happening, and then looked at Catalina with a subtle expression. Catalina started yelling loudly. Mamon's spirit. Yong-ho almost lost his grip on the spear because of her. While Catalina was catching her breath, Yong-ho started observing the lance spirit. "It's a lance one. It's not. The head and the shaft is giving off a scarlet color. I'm sure this is Amon, the Red Lotus demon lance." Catalina moved closer to Yong-ho. With a nervous expression, she observed the red lance while talking. The Red Lotus Demon Spear was the weapon that Mammon used when he was alive. The lance itself is part of a demon family, a very high-ranked demon. Catalina was serious. Young-ho looked at the lance again. So, the lance form is part of a demon family, yes, and Teresa legend. Catalina stopped talking from there. She kept her eyes on Aemon while continuing to talk. If anyone other than Mammon touches it, they'll experience the wrath of hell, master. It happened before Catalina finished talking. A flame that was released from the tip of the head enveloped Young-ho. Young-ho couldn't even scream. There were flames everywhere. It felt like the flame not only enveloped Young-ho, but the entire world. He struggled, he fell to the ground and started rolling around. A couple of seconds later, Young-ho realized something. It wasn't hot. The flame enveloped his body, but it didn't hurt. Young-ho stopped struggling and looked around. Inside of the flame, Young-ho's arms and legs were all intact and haven't been damaged. What was going on? He wondered how Catalina was doing, because the flame filled the entire place. Young-ho quickly turned his head, but he couldn't find Catalina. His body froze up due to the pressure. Right behind him, the one that was watching him, it was a large eye. The large eye was on fire. The thing was in the center of the fiery pit and was looking down at Young-ho. How are you not being burned? In his head, he heard the voice of an adult male. It was deep and overpowering that it felt like it would oppress the entire world. The eye approached Young-ho. Young-ho still couldn't move. After coughing, he looked straight into the eye. The eye observed Young-ho. It felt like the eye was inspecting every inch of Young-ho's body. A large lump of mana. Young-ho sensed it. That eye was Aemon, the Red Lotus demon. Lance. It's possible that this entire space was built by Aemon. Aemon watched Young-ho, and then it laughed. It was impossible for an eye to laugh, but that's what Young-ho felt. The sound of a man's laughter filled his head. Really? Is that so? You have the power of one of the 7 deadly sins. Finally, there's someone that has inherited greed's power. They were happy. They were extremely excited. At the same time, they displayed a totally opposite emotion. But you're still a baby. It seems like I've run out of patience due to being asleep for so long. The sound of the man's laughter died down. The eye moved closer to Young-ho. Young-ho's eyes were filled with the red eye. Young-ho breathed out. He tried to speak as he breathed out. Aemon laughed again. It was a laugh that was different from the previous one, and he wasn't ridiculing Young-ho. I'll adjust to your level for now, you baby. The eye changed into a flame. It enveloped Young-ho again. He burned with the world. Master Young-ho coughed. At the same time, he opened his eyes and looked at Catalina that was approaching him. Instinctively, he pulled himself back. He was still burning. The red lotus flames bloomed out of Young-ho's body. Master. Catalina yelled again. Young-ho extended his hand out and stopped her. And then he catched his breath. The flame started dying out. The flame that rose out of his body disappeared all at once. Ha ha ha! Sweat started rolling down his back. After seeing Catalina standing in the same spot with a nervous expression, he turned his attention to something else. He looked at the lance that was in his right hand. It changed. The scarlet-colored lance changed into a gold lance. The color also changed, and the length shortened. Young-ho's eyes turned into an emerald green color. He inspected the lance using the power of evolution. Name, Aemon, race, specialty, CT6, 6CT6, 6ET6, 6DTT6. 5. There were so many question marks, so he couldn't really see much, but there was one thing he was sure of. The spirit, Aemon, was in lance form. Mammon, who was one of the 7 deadly sins and controlled 14th of the demon world, favored this lance. It shrank, so it matched to my current level. Young-ho quietly mumbled to himself when he was done using the skill. A bitter smile appeared without him knowing. A lot of different emotions were filled within him, but he couldn't express them. Master after. Hearing her quietly calling out, Young-ho looked back at Catalina. She was past being nervous and was on the brink of crying her eyes out. After observing her for a moment, Young-ho spoke. You can come here now, and, like you said, I think it is Aemon. although I think he's asleep now. When Yong-ho gave her permission, Catalina was about to run to his side, but froze after hearing his last comment. With a shocked and excited expression, she looked at Amon. Amazing. Your amazing master. It was extremely significant, but he had an idea why she was saying that. Because of that, Yong-ho chuckled and acted like he was measuring the weapon. Even though it shortened, one of Mammon's spirits trusted itself to Yong-ho. And, if Yong-ho became stronger, then it's possible for it to regain its original power. That's probably the reason why Amon trusted himself to Yong-ho in the first place. Then, was I having that feeling because of this lance? It was greed's additional skill. It was difficult to see it as having luck and wealth. He might be jumping to conclusions, but it's possible that Amon was calling out to Yong-ho. Anyways, he grabbed Amon. It was now time to find a way out of this room. Yong-ho looked at Catalina again, and a frown appeared without him knowing. Oh, master, you're so awesome. To be able to wield Amon. Oh my, you've overcome the wrath of hell. It felt like he was looking at Eligor, not Catalina. She was moving her body in a way that resembled a drunk person, and her eyes looked like tears would roll down at any moment. Catalina, you're really amazing. Praise our master. Praise the house of Mammon. Our master is the best. It seemed like she was really touched. Yong-ho called out her name again. Catalina. As he called out her name louder, Catalina was surprised, and she raised her head. Yong-ho commanded Catalina, act cool-headed. Catalina panicked because of his order, but somehow succeeded in displaying a cold expression. Her eyes asked whether this was the face, and Yong-ho was satisfied by the fact that she calmed down. Yong-ho spoke while looking at Almon, who was about 1 meter tall. Great, now, let's think of a way to get out of here. As soon as Yong-ho finished talking, the ground, walls, and the ceiling started shaking. Yong-ho quickly lowered his body, and his eyes met with Catalina's. The shaking didn't stop. Scraps started falling from the ceiling. Do you think it's because you pulled out Amon? Catalina asked worriedly, and Yong-ho started looking around. The shaking was getting more violent. It felt like this room was going to fall apart soon. Yong-ho quickly placed Amon back on top of the altar, but the shaking didn't stop. It was actually getting worse. Yong-ho lit the room using the flashlight. He noticed something that looked like an entrance, but it was completely sealed. There wasn't time to think. Yong-ho grabbed Catalina's wrist and ran towards the area they fell. Using the flashlight, he looked at the hole that him and Catalina fell in. The fragments that were falling from the ceiling were getting bigger. The walls and the ground were going to break at any moment. How were they going to get out? Will the method he thought of work? He pulled Catalina using her arm and started yelling when she was close. Catalina, you trust me, right? I trust you. Catalina answered right away. Despite the dangerous situation, Catalina didn't have any doubts. Yong-ho smiled. After nodding his head, he placed Amon on the ground. He placed both of his hands on top of Catalina's thighs. He used his power. Catalina flinched for a moment. Green flames were rising out of Yong-ho's eyes. The power of evolution. Yong-ho's mana was entering Catalina's body. As soon as the ceiling fell, the walls and ground fell apart. In that moment, Catalina ran on the surface of the wall. She was so quick that it reminded him of a falcon that was soaring. Yong-ho, who was on Catalina's back, exhausted all of his mana, which caused his body to stretch out. After making a rope out of Yong-ho's top, they used it to tie each other together. Catalina grabbed Yong-ho's legs and ran up the wall. She jumped diagonally towards the wall on the opposite side and continued running. Specialized agility development. Since she constantly sparred with a treant, her development rate reached its limit, which made it possible to use this method. It was a gamble. Carrying Yong-ho while continuously running up a tall wall seemed impossible no matter how he looked at it. But Yong-ho bet his money on Catalina. Catalina didn't stop. It looked like she was moving alongside a falcon. It was a movement she couldn't imagine before the development. Gravity didn't stop her. She continued running, but, moments later, Catalina let out a groan. She felt like her legs and ankle were going to break. Catalina endured it and continued running. She jumped again. This time, she didn't land on the opposite wall. She lacked the strength. There wasn't much left. She was almost there. Ah! That's when Yong-ho came in. He used whatever strength he had left. and pierced Aemon into the wall. It was for a moment, despite of the fact that Yongho's body became stronger during the past couple of days. Piercing Aemon deep into the wall while being exhausted was too much work. But it was enough. Catalina moved again. She didn't let Yongho's effort go to waste and placed her feet on the wall. With her remaining energy, she ran up the wall again. The relationship between the owner and the spirit wasn't like master and servant. Yongho pulled Aemon out right on time, and it looked as if he read Catalina's mind. "Ah!" Catalina screamed. She turned her body in midair, and using her remaining energy, she ran up the opposite wall. She pushed her body into the air. They rolled on the ground. Yongho and Catalina both rolled on the ground, and after bumping into the entrance of the secret passageway, they stopped. Yongho was on top of Catalina again. Ha, 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 ha. Both of them didn't say a word and were trying to catch their breaths. And both of them started laughing. They survived. They escaped. They escaped safely, Catalina. Yongho called out to Catalina, and instead of groaning, she answered quietly. Both of them were exhausted. They wanted to rest like this, but they couldn't. When Yongho arrived on the first level, the spirit of the dungeon and Yongho were connected again. The spirit of the dungeon was in a panicking state because the owner couldn't be reached, so they spoke loudly. "The dungeon is under attack." Yongho's eyes widened. They both stood up quickly. Chapter 16. He didn't have time to catch his breath. Yongho and Catalina both ran while sweat was rolling down their faces. They ran through the empty Demon King's room and opened the door, but this room was empty too. However, Yongho already looked inside of the dungeon thanks to the spirit of the dungeon, and instead of panicking, he opened the next door master. It was the room that connected to the warehouse and the prison that they just started building. Eligor and all the other spirits were in the room that was connected to the last room with a trap. Instead of answering Eligor, Yongho quickly checked the spirits and the condition of the room. In front of the latch door, the goblins were stacking heavy objects, and the Trent was standing in front of the front door while extending its vines. The skeleton was standing with a blank face. Well, they didn't have any expression since it was a skull, but they were standing in the corner. "Where were you? You're covered in sweat." Eligor didn't finish his sentence, and instead noticed that Catalina was sweating as well. When Eligor assumed that something happened between them, Yongho waved his hand and spoke. "Whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. Anyways, listen up. Beyond that door, there are 8 kobolds and an unknown demon with an extremely large hammer. There were a lot more that invaded the dungeon, but it seems like the traps took out a couple of them. Do you guys know anything?" He checked this through the spirit of the dungeon. The latch door was shaking violently. It seemed like the door was going to break soon. Eligor instinctively looked to the door and answered quickly. "I am sure it's a wandering demon family that's nearby. If it's an owner that already has a dungeon, they wouldn't send a group that small to attack the dungeon, even if they believed that the House of Mammon has completely fallen. There was a good chance that it was one of the weaker spirits that Eligor mentioned earlier. If that's the case, they're probably thinking that Eligor and Catalina were the only ones in the dungeon. However, they already passed through 3 rooms where the traps were working properly." Yongho closed his eyes. He breathed in and spoke. "It doesn't matter which side. It's possible that they might think this dungeon doesn't have an owner." It sounded like he was saying it to himself. The door shook violently again. The goblins were holding bamboo spears and watched the door. Eligor spoke again. "But sir, the thing you have in your hand, it's Aemon, the Red Lotus Demon Lance." "Aemon," Catalina shouted after being quiet for so long. Eligor got excited after hearing that it was Aemon. "What? Are you talking about the Red Lotus Demon Lance that lights the heaven on fire and evaporates the ocean just by swinging it?" It seemed like it was a popular weapon. When Yongho confirmed it with his expression, Eligor was filled with joy. Eligor looked like he would open the door if he left him in his current state, so Yongho quickly spoke again. "It is Aemon, but I can't use him properly right now. It's the same thing as not having it at all. Even if he could use it, he wouldn't have any mana left." The door shook again. The latch looked almost broken. The enemy doesn't know about the dungeon's current fighting power, so they're probably careless. We'll use that to our advantage. He spoke quickly and urgently. The nervous Eligor asked, "Do you have some sort of plan?" Instead of answering, Yongho nodded his head. he answered while looking at the door that was about to break. Well, create a commotion and slice their heads off. Yong-ho looked at Catalina. He gulped. He tried to stay calm, but it was hard. He heard it several of times. The ones that attacked the dungeons, the other demon family's hellface from now on. But this was his first time. Behind the door, there were spirits that were trying to kill Yong-ho. It wasn't a game where you promised another chance despite the outcome. One side will die. They needed to be killed in order to live. Boom. The latch broke along with the loud sound that it made. The door opened as if it was blown to pieces. The kobolds rushed in through the opening. They were monsters that were slightly larger than the goblins. They were holding low-grade sword, and Lance Yong-ho saw them. He yelled as he saw them rush in as soon as the door opened. Pull. The goblins, John and Ron, reacted. The two goblins stood on either side of the door, and when they pulled the rope that they holding, the kobolds that rushed in fell down due to rope that was raised up. However, this was just the beginning. The kobolds didn't fall just because they rushed in and didn't see the rope in front of the door. Trent, who was standing in the center of the room, let out a deep roar and waved its vines. It grabbed the kobold's body and legs and threw them to the other side of the door. The remaining goblins didn't just watch. They pierced the kobolds that were on the ground with their bamboo spears and shrieked. Seconds after the door was opened, they had the advantage. While the kobolds fell and were flying out of the room, Yong-ho looked straight ahead. Something was standing behind the kobolds. It was a giant that was wearing a green cape. They had a tanned and unsophisticated face with an angry expression. Trent grabbed another kobold and threw them. Through the room that was activated in the background, he saw Catalina's movement, and the giant stomped on the ground. Instead of backing out, it charged. It pushed through the kobolds and headed straight towards Yong-ho. Because of the unexpected situation, Eligor shouted. In order to catch the giant, Catalina threw herself amongst the kobold. Yong-ho saw the giant. They were holding a large warhammer and started waving it around. The Trent's vine got caught in their attack, and it ended up being cut off. The giant didn't stop. The distance between Yong-ho and the giant was getting shorter. The giant was charging through. He lowered his head and passed the Trent. The giant dodged the vine again and jumped up and aimed the hammer towards Yong-ho's head. Clank. The hammer hit the ground when it was brought straight down. It had an enormous amount of energy. Yong-ho dodging the attack and not freezing up from nervousness and fear was a miracle. Master Catalina yelled. Trent turned its body around. Eligor started running towards his direction. The giant grabbed the hammer and glared at Yong-ho. It was like a snake that was trying to eat a frog. The giant had the same eyes as a predator that was trying to catch its prey. The giant took another step. It closed the distance between Yong-ho and waved the hammer around. It felt like he was suffocating. It felt like he was going to die before the hammer even hits him. However, Yong-ho took a step forward. Instead of backing out, he yelled and placed all of his strength into the hand that was holding Aemon. He didn't think with his head. He trusted his instincts. Instead of dodging the hammer, he threw his body towards it. It was reckless. Eligor yelled. Catalina kicked off the ground. In that moment, Yong-ho and the giant exchanged eye contact. The giant smiled. Yong-ho gritted his teeth. Pull! It was in that moment because of that he couldn't yell. However, he thought about it and got an answer. The skeletons were next to Yong-ho and they extended their arms out and grabbed the cape. It was only for a moment. It delayed the giant's movement by a second, but that was enough. Yong-ho's left shoulder hit the giant's abdomen. At the same time, Amon pierced through his stomach. Ah ha ha! Mana released his mana as he yelled. All of his mana was focused on one spot. He didn't know how to use the weapon he just obtained. Yong-ho hoped he filled it with his mana, and Aemon responded to his idiotic request. Green flames started bursting out. The lance started draining the giant's mana. The giant quickly tried to get them back, but it was no use. Aemon's fiery road burnt everything. It burnt the giant's mana and swallowed their insides and soul. Akak. The giant started screaming when its insides were being burned while it was alive. It moved its body violently and waved both of their arms to try to attack Yong-ho. However, it wasn't enough. The skeletons grabbed onto the giant's arms. Yong-ho yelled once again and twisted Amon, who was pierced into the giant's stomach. Amon attacked again with fire gar. The giant wasn't able to endure it and took a step back. The green flame ate all of its insides and was now burning away their skin. Yong-ho twisted Aemon again. It was to pull out Aemon from the giant. Not a single drop of blood seeped out of its body, and it's probably because the green flame burned the giant's body and soul. As soon as Yong-ho pulled Amon out, he waved it in the air. After taking the giant, he started breathing heavily. He yelled out towards the front Catalina. She answered through her action. After the fight started, she didn't take a break once, and as she approached the giant, she sliced the giant's head off with a dagger. She then pierced the dagger into the area where their heart was located. It all happened within a minute or two after the door opened. Everyone that was in the room saw Yong-ho and Catalina. As the flame died down, Yong-ho extended his left hand forward. He did it based on his instincts. He concentrated on the mana that was above the dead giant's chest. The goblins and kobolds watched with a blank expression, and Catalina and Eligor watched in awe. It was a lump of dark red mana. The spirit of a demon family, that's what hovered above their chest. It floated slowly at first, but it flew at a fast rate and was sucked into the palm of Yong-ho's hand. Absorption of the spirit, desiring mana. It's the very reason why the law of the jungle had to be applied in this world. Yong-ho felt the mana fill his body. Yong-ho felt his mana increase tremendously. Yong-ho wasn't the only one that grew. The dungeon's daily production volume has been increased from 30 to 50. The maximum mana storage volume has also been increased from 300 to 400. If the owner becomes stronger, so does the dungeon. If the dungeon grows, so will the owner. He was exhausted. The injury that he got while trying to obtain Aemon was still there. However, it was an exhilarating yet pleasant feeling. This type of pleasant feeling was something he was feeling for the first time. It was a short moment, but it was enough to enjoy the result. After absorbing all of the spirit's mana, Yong-ho started breathing heavily. He slowly raised his head and looked towards the front. He saw a group of kobolds with a shocked expression. He saw Catalina kneeling on one knee and looking up at him with a bright smile. He also noticed the skeleton standing there with a dumb look. "I'll do everything within my power to evolve you into a Death Knight." Yong-ho made a promise to the skeletons in his head and then started talking. He thought it was cheesy, but since he was exhausted, he couldn't think of a better way to say it. Shall we continue? The kobolds were smarter than what Yong-ho had thought. They all threw their weapons on the ground as if they had planned it beforehand. Chapter 17. We were lucky. That's what Yong-ho assumed the day after the first battle. After accepting the kobold's surrender, Yong-ho fainted, and after a long rest, he was able to wake up. Maybe it's because he rolled around a lot, but raising his body while lying down caused his muscles to scream out in pain. They were really lucky. They wouldn't have been able to win if he didn't obtain Amon before the battle. If the skeletons didn't intercept in time, they would have lost. Crazy. He thought about when he ran towards the hammer. Did Yong-ho have an aggressive side, or was it a change that occurred when he awakened as a demon king? Anyways, they won. They survived his horizon, widened after experiencing it himself. First, Amon. It was still a red lance, but it was definitely placed beside Yong-ho, and Catalina and Eligor Master You've awakened. He didn't see them when he woke up, but they somehow knew and were now standing before his eyes. They both had a similar expression. Like babies looking at their mother, Catalina looked cute, but Eligor was a bit. Yong-ho chuckled at the thought, and when the two saw him, they reacted to it. It seemed like they understood it as him being in a better condition. Yong-ho extended his hand out towards Catalina. "You did well yesterday, and I'm sorry, but could you get me some water? Please wait a moment." Catalina quickly answered and went to grab a cup and kettle. Yong-ho turned his attention to Eligor. "How long was I out for? You were in bed for a day." "No wonder why my lower back hurts." Yong-ho rolled his shoulders after answering. Eligor Catalina came back and handed Yong-ho the cup of water. "Here you go, master." "Thanks." He felt a lot better after drinking the water. After drinking the entire cup of water, he felt a bit lightheaded, and after briefly closing his eyes, he asked, "What happened after the battle?" "The remaining 4 kobolds are locked up in the prison. The corpse of the low-level demon family has been stored in an empty room. Oh, we also collected the weapons that they used. Yong-ho's eyes widened at Eligor's answer. Stored the corpses. Why did they store the corpses? Did the corpses turn into a zombie or a skeleton in the demon world? That means free soldiers. So is it a good thing? Eligor interrupted Yong-ho's imagination. He had a very serious expression. Even though you obtain the spirit, there's still a good amount of mana left in that body. The dungeon currently doesn't have that facility, but later, when the mana room has been created, you'll be able to drain out the mana. Eligor had been serious and stern from the beginning. He was wanting to take everything that he could from the enemy. Oh, okay, but draining out mana from a corpse, Yong-ho did feel uncomfortable about it, but decided to keep it to himself. The dungeon wasn't in the best condition to quibble over it, and it might be common sense to do this in the demon world. On top of that, Eligor wasn't done talking. Also, it's a bit of a high-rank facility, but later, when a magic room has been created, you can reuse the corpse by turning them into either a zombie or skeleton. It was true. Yong-ho briefly looked at it from a human's point of view, but quickly dismissed it. He couldn't build it right now anyways. It's something he could think about later. And the weapons you've obtained. The quality of the cape and hammer are very good. A magic was cast on the cape to help maintain the temperature, and a simple strengthening magic was casted on the hammer, so it's very sturdy. And the others. We collected all the money that they had. It may be possible to purchase a rank 2 spirit. Eligor kind of smiled cunningly. Yong-ho did the same and continued asking, any casualties? All the spirits are safe. It's all thanks to you that the battle ended the way it did. Thanks to this battle, the spirit's loyalty and respect has increased tremendously. As soon as Eligor finished talking, the spirit of the dungeon spoke. Not only the spirits, but the spirit of the dungeon seemed to like him more after that battle. I'm sure it's obvious from the expression. Yong-ho looked at the Catalina that stopped being the cool-headed spirit, and Eligor that's always crying. He closed his eyes after taking a deep breath. He tried circulating the mana. Maybe it's because he started out with a small amount of mana, but his mana level increased a lot. It felt like the mana that was circulating within him increased by 2 folds. This is because I obtained the spirit. Yong-ho felt joy by the fact that his power increased, and then took a deep breath. It's weird that I don't feel anything, even though they were a demon family. A person died. However, he didn't feel guilty about it. It was so that I could live. They tried to kill me. That's what Yong-ho told himself, and purposefully calmed himself. As long as he didn't kill without reason, it was fine. He decided to leave it at that. After he finished circulating his mana, Yong-ho opened his eyes. Catalina and Eligor looked at Yong-ho quietly. It seemed like they tried to stay as quiet as possible since he was concentrating. Yong-ho showed with his action what he was going to do. Green flames blossomed out of his eyes. Name, Chwiryong, M-race, half-human, half-demon, Demon King. Element, Fire Darkness, development rate, 5,000 and fewed. Even if it was small, the amount of stars that Yong-ho had increased. The 7 deadly sins category wasn't shown before, but now, greed was next to it. Is it because I obtained the spirit? He saw things he couldn't see before. The same applied to the level that was attached to the categories. This time, he looked at Catalina. Name, Catalina, F, race. Race, half succubus, half dark elf. Main elements, wind, darkness. Secondary elements, thunder, water, earth. Main stats, succubus, charm, mana. Dark elf, agility skills, development. Rate, 2100. Succubus, charm level 03. Dark elf, agility level 23. 5. Hybrid level 035. Succubus, mana level 035. Dark elf, Tive skills level 1. 3. She had more changes than Yong-ho. The category that stood out the most was agility, because it had level 2 at the end. She did evolve once, probably means it was level 1 before, right? If that's the case, then it made sense why the skills level was at 1. She was a soldier that was fast and specialized in using a dagger. The amount of stars changed. 2. Since her agility was developed, did her other stats change a bit as well? Yong-ho nodded his head since it was a reasonable change, and then looked up. A bitter smile appeared on his face when he noticed 2 boxes of light that he's never seen before appear. Shadow elf, succubus. Catalina was a half dark elf and half succubus, so she had the choice on how she wanted to advance. It wasn't an easy decision. It was a promotion that could be decided after the next development, but he needed to see the information regarding the different advancements. After deactivating the power of evolution, he lightly nodded his head and looked at Eligor. You said that if I get stronger, then the heart of the dungeon will get stronger too, right? Yes, that's correct. Not only that, but Catalina, me and the other spirits will be affected by your growth. I wonder, the relationship between the owner and the spirits wasn't a master and servant relationship. It was more direct and intimate. If the owner was the head, then the spirits were the hands and feet that the owner commanded. Did you find out anything from the kobolds? Eligor answered as if he was waiting for Yong-ho to ask. They're known to be scared and cowardly, so as soon as their leader died, they did start talking. But you can't believe every word that they're saying. While we're talking about this, how about building a torture chamber after the prison? Torture chamber. Yes, it's used to punish the spirits, but it's also needed when we need to question the prisoners. If it's built right next to the prison, it'll be very effective. The prisoners will be able to watch the other prisoners getting tortured. Eligor looked at Yong-ho and was waiting for him to compliment him. It happened last time when he mentioned prisons. But Eligor looked excited while talking about it. Yong-ho closed his eyes for a moment. He imagined Catalina crying while being tortured by Eligor. No, this is too dangerous. When he changed his target from Catalina to the skeleton, he felt more calm. Prison and torture chamber, they were horrible facilities, but the prison was already built, and if they had to continue fighting, then a torture chamber would be necessary. Yong-ho pushed aside on making a decision and asked Catalina, how strong were the group that invaded? Recently, I don't want to belittle your victory, but Catalina carefully spoke. That was basically her answer. So they weren't that strong. That's probably why they rushed. He knew they were skilled in fighting. If that's not the case, there was no reason for them to have that bloodthirsty expression. However, out of all the weaklings that targeted Mammon's dungeon, they were the weakest. They waited for the protective shield to weaken, and out of all the weaklings, they were the ones that attacked first. Will there be more weaklings attacking the dungeon? A frown appeared on Yong-ho's face as he mumbled quietly. Even though he just woke up after passing out from the battle, he didn't have a lot of time. He had to decide on how he was going to defend the dungeon from the future enemies. I have two options. 1. Evolve the spirits. 2. Delay the development and strengthen the dungeon facilities using that manner. Both choices had pros and cons. If they evolved them, then the quality of the soldiers will increase. However, the dungeon wasn't in the greatest condition, so they had to be careful when fighting the enemy. Strengthening the dungeon's facility was good in the long run. Even though he couldn't increase the power right away, developing several spirits into different levels at once was impossible. In the end, he had to do both. However, he had to pick the best one right now. Yong-ho looked back and forth between Catalina and Eligor. It was short, but he made his decision. Chapter 18. No one knows when the dungeon shop first appeared within the demon world. There are some that say 100 years ago, and others that say that it appeared way before then. They were baseless assumptions. The history of the shop didn't matter because, at this point, the dungeon shop was a necessity within the demon world. It was different from the virtual space, where the entire room was white. The sky was on fire, and the color of the walls was so black that it seemed like they were made from hardened lava. The Pentagram Council, the 5 giants that controlled the dungeon shop. They were the board of directors, to be exact. Like the name states, a pentagram was drawn on the floor by lava, and a chair was placed in each of the corners. The board of directors were the only ones that sat in those chairs. The king of pride is gathering soldiers. A big war may break out soon in the northeast. With a low voice, a large red Orobus pointed to the map that was materialized in the center of the pentagram and spoke. Out of the many demon princes within the demon world, he was one of them. And out of the demons that the dungeon shop possessed, they were known to have superhuman strength. They were wearing a neat tuxedo and had a pig's head and a bulky body. They looked odd, but at the same time, it matched. Orobas had 6 horns and managed the dungeon shop that was located in the north. To their right, a man with a spider head spoke softly. The king of envy is also gathering soldiers. I think they found out that they've been targeted by the King of Pride. Within this month, they've already purchased 20,000 skeleton warriors. He was known to be the intelligent one in the group and had a body that was similar to a spider's. Even though they looked like a human, there are rumors that his true form is a big spider that's larger than a mountain. His name was Bifrons. He also managed the north of the demon world, along with Orobas. The King of Envy was purchasing a large amount of skeleton warriors. Despite this sensitive information, the one that sat on the left side of Orobas started chuckling. It was Abraxas, and he was known to have the strongest mana, and also managed the western part of the demon world. He had the head of a rooster and, on top, had 7 horns. Both of his legs were large snakes, and each had a different poison. They spoke sarcastically. That's the King of Envy for your quantity over quality, right? It's too early to make a hasty conclusion. This is a war between kings. 20 Zolls and soldiers can't be considered a lot. Bifron alerted Abraxas. Hasty conclusion. Orobas looked at the demon world map again and asked, "What about the other kings? The Queen of Wrath is curled up, which is unlike her. The King of Lust is busy as usual because of the witch's Sabbath." The one that answered was Samael, who was sitting on the right side of Bifron and was known to have the fastest wings. She was the queen of the harpies, and she had gold hair that matched her beautiful face, but had black wings that didn't match with her beauty. Orobas tilted his head. And gluttony. It doesn't look like they're going to sit by and watch. They're quietly increasing the numbers of high-rank spirits. A couple of days ago, I found out through an agent that the King of Gluttony may have purchased a bone dragon, the demons that possessed the 7 deadly sins. The 6 demons that controlled the demon world were busily moving around under the surface. Abrasax shrugged his shoulders. The one king that doesn't possess one of the deadly sins. We don't have to worry about the King of Violence, right? It seems like they're still asleep. Out of 6 kings that controlled the demon world, the King of Violence was the only one that didn't have the power of the 7 deadly sins. Orobas touched his chin. Then, is the King of Sloth the last one we should watch out for? She's always been lazy. Samael smiled softly as if it was a joke. Orobas was satisfied with Samael's answer. He leaned his large body against the chair and spoke quietly. The power of the 6 kings is similar. That's why it's well balanced right now. Even though the King of Pride is trying to break that balance, they won't be able to do anything unexpected. No matter how strong he is, he can take on the other 5 kings by himself. It's a good thing, unless someone that's strong enough to defeat one of the kings comes along. This wonderful balance will surely continue. The dungeon shop didn't desire just one king. The conflict between the kings is what caused the dungeon shops to be created. Bifron and Abraxas agreed as well. The other directors felt the same, and they smiled. But one. There was one that had a different smile. Miss Citri. Samael called out quietly and looked at the last best director, the red-headed Citri. The beautiful Citri answered while touching her chin. Her eyes were on the map. "No, it's nothing. It's just fun." Her vague answer made Samael tilt his head. He looked at the map as well and tried to figure out her intention. Citri was looking at southern part, which was empty. It was the King of Greed's land, who controlled 1/4 of the demon world and was the greatest demon in the demon world. A wild dungeon monster appeared. 2 crazy ants and 1 slime Yong-ho, who was the King of Greed, frowned when he heard the spirit of the dungeon's energetic voice front. As they stated, the monster that they mentioned was before him. 2 red ants that were the size of a large dog and a round slime that reminded him of tree sap were in front of him. Encountering a monster was understandable. He welcomed it since fighting can increase his development rate. However, there was one thing that made Young-ho think, why are there monsters in my dungeon? The monsters in front of him weren't spirits. They were monsters that didn't have an owner. The spirit of the dungeon and Young-ho shared a part of their knowledge, and according to the spirit, they were nothing more than ants and cockroaches that you see at home. They weren't really important to the dungeon. Those types of monsters don't exist in ordinary dungeons, and even if they do appear, they're usually taken care of right away. The ants are the worst ones. It's not that he especially disliked ants. Actually, they were better than cockroaches. However, the issue was the lifestyle of their kind. Like the ants in the human world, they were busy in the demon world as well. A large ant colony might exist underneath the dungeon. Master, concentrate. After hearing Catalina's stern voice, Yong-ho erased his distracting thoughts. While looking towards the front, he spoke as he put strength into the hand that was holding Armin. "I'll take the slime, Catalina and Skull. Take care of the ants." "Understood, Skull." Skull, Catalina, and the skeleton soldier, Skull, answered. They ran towards the ants 2 days ago. In order to increase the dungeon's defense, Yong-ho decided to focus on working on the dungeon's facility rather than evolving the spirits. Despite that, he used the power of evolution and evolved just one spirit, and that was the skeleton soldier, Skull. They were low-level spirits and workers, but they didn't have any specialized evolution like the goblins. However, when he first evolved them, their rank increased to skeleton soldier. Yong-ho equipped the soldier with the hammer that the enemy used and named them Skull. Death Knight was considered the highest rank amongst the skeletons, and he planned on evolving them to that rank, so he wanted to give them a special name, but simplicity was the best. Catalina was able to take down a crazy ant with one attack. However, instead of attacking the other monsters, she watched Skull fight. It's because Skull had to increase their development rate through the battle. The same applies to me. Yong-ho looked at the slime that was gliding on the ground and focused. Amon was known for burning the sky and evaporating the sea with just one swing. For Yong-ho, performing that kind of task was a bit too much. However, he was still able to use a bit of Aemon's power. Just one attack, Yong-ho kicked off the ground. It must have noticed that Yong-ho targeted them because it released acid fluid. It was fast and strong. If it touched him, it would melt away his skin and bone. However, Yong-ho easily dodged their attack. He leaned his body to the side, kicked off the ground, and shortened the distance between him and the slime ha. He used Aemon and pierced through the slime's body. When it pierced through the center, he released his mana. Flames bursted inside their body. The green flame enveloped the slime's entire body. Because of their strong acid and mucus, the slime was able to neutralize most physical attacks, but they couldn't do anything about Aemon's flames. Yong-ho smiled, and after pulling Armin out, he stretched his back. Feeling satisfied, him and Catalina exchanged glances several times and then watched Skull fight a crazy ant. 2 days after the first attack, Yong-ho was looking for the armory that belonged to the owner 3 generations ago. Chapter 19. Therese, a saying that a rich man never goes flat broke. The House of Mammon wasn't an ordinary rich family. When Mammon was alive, he controlled 1/4 of the demon world, and it was safe to describe them as a royal family. Because of that, it took a long time for the House of Mammon to collapse, and during that time, there were families that became pretty famous. Kaiwan, the devil of distortion, who was the owner 3 generations ago, experienced this. They say that Kaiwan had a very adventurous personality. They spent a lot of time exploring the dungeon and achieved many great things. During his time within the first floor of the dungeon, they activated 80 of it. The day after, they were attacked. When Yong-ho encouraged the spirits, all he did was compliment them on how well they did, but all of their eyes were filled with tears like Eligor. It's what Eligor told Yong-ho after he looked at the kobolds that were locked up in the prison. Yong-ho remembered his conversation with Catalina and asked, "Do you mean the owner that discovered the arena?" "Oh, I see that you've already been informed. I heard it from Catalina. She doesn't know where it's located, though." Eligor nodded at his comment. He quickly looked around and quietly answered him, "Yes, Kaiwan did make the location of the arena a secret. I believe he did that in order to block the spirits from entering it and challenging the arena. Even though it was a discussion between the owner and their closest spirit, there wasn't anyone here to eavesdrop on their conversation. In order to talk more about this, Yong-ho sat on the throne. And then Eligor looked around once more. He approached Yong-ho and spoke quietly. He didn't hide all the things that he discovered. The way he smiled made him look cunning. Pushing aside his thoughts about Eligor's expression, Yong-ho became very interested. Yong-ho quickly asked, "What kind of facilities are they?" "Therese, a variety of them. But the most important ones are probably the armory and the gold mine." "Gold mine." "Therese, a gold mine within the dungeon." Yong-ho's eyes widened and raised his voice without knowing. Instead of looking around, Eligor smiled brightly and answered, "Yes, that's right. It's different from the gold mine in the human world. but I know for a fact that there's a gold mine. If my assumptions are correct, there's still a good amount of gold. Yong-ho wondered what this dungeon didn't have, but he tried his best to calm down. First gold mine, a place filled with gold. It was good. If he found it, he knew the dungeon's condition would improve a lot, but at the same time, it was odd. But why was it deactivated when the previous owners were here? It was hard to believe that it was because of the spirits. It was the gold mine that Chwiryong found and activated. Did the spirits of the House of Mammon not acknowledge the previous owners? A frown appeared on Eligor's face. It was similar to Yong-ho's assumption, but his answer was different. It's because of the dungeon monsters. Dungeon monster. The beasts of the demon world that live in the dungeon. The demon world wasn't like the human world. The demon world was flexible because there was a lot of mana, and because of that, the dungeon, sky, ground, and even space itself moves around unexpectedly. Not only that, but the mana that exists in the demon world evolves small bugs and animals into evil spirits. That's how dungeon monsters were born. The beasts enter inside the dungeon due to the movement, and through mana, they're evolved into evil spirits. If they were to be compared to the human world, they were like the bugs and rats that appear inside the house. Ordinary owners took care of these dungeon monsters very easily. If the dungeon monsters couldn't be taken care of, then they'll request the dungeon shops to send dungeon cleaners to get rid of the vermin. However, the House of Mammon couldn't do either. There were two big reasons. First, Mammon's dungeons' distinct characteristics. Ordinary dungeons don't have a lot of spaces that are inactive. New spaces are usually created in ordinary dungeons, and after filling it with mana, the room is activated. A room with an actual entrance and lighting that's created from mana. They create those rooms and expand the spaces. However, the House of Mammon's dungeon was known to have an extremely large space, and unlike the ordinary dungeons, there were a lot of empty rooms that didn't have mana, meaning they were inactive. When compared to the human world, these inactive spaces were like really deep caves or an underground construction site. For evil spirits and dungeon monsters, these areas were the ideal living spaces for them. There were a lot of dungeon monsters that were grown naturally, and among them, there were strong monsters. Second, the dungeon didn't have enough money to use a dungeon cleaner. Anyways, there was only one choice. The previous owners couldn't handle the dungeon monsters, so they had to give up on the gold mine and the armory. It's like getting kicked out because of the vermin. Yong-ho's voice sounded dispirited, which made Eligor bow his head. His face was already red, but because he was embarrassed, it turned more red. I'm not trying to make an excuse, but I heard that the dungeon monster that appears at the gold mine is pretty tough. It's recorded that there's a lot of them, and that they're very strong. Yong-ho just nodded his head. It wasn't Eligor's fault that the dungeon monster took away the gold mine from the dungeon. Eligor glanced at Yong-ho and spoke again. It might be difficult to try to take back the gold mine now, but the armory, if the armory can be obtained, it'll increase the dungeon's strength tremendously, and someday you'll be able to obtain the gold mine, which was the dream of the previous owners. Evolve the spirits and arm them with the weapons that are in the armory. It wasn't a bad idea. During the last battle, after the goblins made the traps, they grabbed the bamboo spears and started fighting. I'm interested in the gear that Chwiryong found in the arena. Yong-ho made up his mind. He stood up and thought of the saying, "Strike while the iron is hot." Bring Catalina. Well, begin the search right away. Eligor's eyes sparkled. The day after that discussion, Yong-ho sighed deeply after escaping the flashback by opening his eyes. In order to activate the inactive rooms, he needed 10 mana. Currently, Yong-ho's maximum mana level was 180, and since the dungeon's daily mana production volume was 50, he could activate a maximum of 23 rooms if he decided to use every ounce of his mana. Of course, Yong-ho wasn't going to do that. His mana was needed for the dungeon facilities, and he needed to save some in case of another attack. When thinking about that, the number of rooms he can activate in a day decreased a lot, and since he might have to fight, the progress of the search slowed down as well. At least my experience level is increasing a lot. Yong-ho activated the power of evolution and looked at himself. The development rate increased from 50 to 80. With a bit more experience, he'll be able to evolve. Since there were a lot of examples, he was able to better understand the mechanism of this skill. The development rate was equivalent to the experience points within a game. The stronger the spirit was, the harder it was to fill in the development rate, and the weaker the spirit was, the development rate filled up even from the smallest task. Yong-ho looked at Skull, who was currently lying on the ground. Name, Skullet. Race, Skeleton Soldier. Main elements, HD development rate, 4700. The available routes are Skeleton Warrior and Skeleton Archer. After deactivating the power of evolution, he looked at Catalina, who was currently resting beside him. After noticing him looking at her, she quickly took out a map and laid it on the ground. I'm very sorry about this, but the records of the previous owner aren't perfect. However, I'm sure that it's somewhere around this area. If it's you, I'm confident that you'll find it. At first, she spoke like a child because she thought she was in trouble. But as she talked more, her eyes started to sparkle. It seemed like she was putting her money Yong-ho's luck in wealth, which was one of skills. So you're using your owner, huh? When Yong-ho made that comment after clicking his tongue, Catalina looked like she didn't know what to do. It was the reaction he was expecting, so he chuckled and lightly pinched her cheek. He stood up from his seat. Since we've rested, let's head out. If it's not forward, then it's to the left, Yong-ho mumbled to himself and looked around the room. He closed his eyes and extended his hands out in different directions. Trust my instincts. He was stimulating his luck in wealth. To be exact, Yong-ho was able to satisfy his greed. He opened his eyes. He looked to the left. That way, he immediately started walking, while Yong-ho was exploring the dungeon with Catalina and Skull. Eligor, who was a butler and was also an important spirit to the dungeon, took the goblins and was focused on the construction work. As Eligor explained many times to Yong-ho, the dungeon in the demon world wasn't just a geographical feature, but a large spirit. Because of that, the facilities within the dungeon were also known as the dungeon's internal organs. Mana is used to activate the rooms, and by using the dungeon's mana and ingredients, better facilities are created. These facilities are managed by using mana, and it was possible to move their location within the dungeon. After the first battle, instead of evolving the spirits, Yong-ho decided to focus on strengthening the dungeon. The distance between the dungeon entrance and his room increased and secured the rooms so that a variety of facilities can be created. For the facilities that have already been installed, he changed their location to increase their defense. The central road was known as the dungeon spine, and Eligor widened the space in the road to the prison of it. He made space in order to create the new torture chamber. He really wanted to increase the size of the prison. The prison within the dungeon wasn't just used to lock enemy spirits and torture them. A high-quality prison that's been made with a good amount of mana and ingredients will forcefully drain out the mana from the prisoners. The prison can also be used as a breeding farm, where they can retrain the dungeon monsters and turn them into spirits. That's why the prison is considered an important facility. It can be used in many different ways. The torture chamber is also another important room. Eligor created torturing tools with joy. Since the ingredients were pretty ordinary, he couldn't make a stylish tool like the Iron Maiden, but one could torture a prisoner with just a chair and knife alone. Eligor decided to be satisfied with the smallest things. Butler, feels good feels. John was bringing the ingredients that were going to be used for the torture room, and he saw Eligor's expression. Eligor answered with a warm smile. Haha, how could I not be in a good mood? The dungeon is improving day by day. As soon as he finished talking, Eligor thought about Yong-ho during the first fight. Haha. His bedroom must be made as quickly as possible so that we're prepared for the successor that'll be born in the future. Successor bedroom, what's the connection? John tiled his head and asked with a confused expression, but Eligor didn't answer. He kept this imagination to himself and looked at the kobolds that were locked up. You guys shouldn't worry so much either. You'll be tortured once the torture chamber is complete. After I confirm your honesty by torturing you, I'll make sure you change into the House of Mammon's servants. He then raised a log that had nails pierced all around it. The kobolds quickly raised their voices. Woof, 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 oink, oink, oink. They were saying that they'll swear allegiance right now, but Eligor didn't understand. No, it's possible that he knew from their desperate looks, but chose to ignore it. Haha, okay, you just have to wait a bit longer. Eligor had a warm smile on his face as he placed the log down. He looked ahead with a calm expression. I hope the master returns soon. If it's Yong Ho, he'll definitely be able to find the armory. Just thinking about him made Eligor smile, and this time he picked up a very sharp knife. The kobold's cry was music to his ears, and he focused on his work again. Chapter 20. Yong Ho moved to the left. Every time he reached the end of the room, he activated a new room, and he kept on moving forward. Having luck in wealth was Greed's secondary skill, and it was a skill that was difficult to describe. Just a feeling, instinctively choosing. Because of that, he couldn't explain to Catalina and Skull why they were walking forward. He just felt that he would obtain something if he continued walking in this path. However, several hours later, Catalina and Yong Ho himself started to get worried. Was this the right path? No. Even if he could obtain something by walking on this road, was that something the armory? It wasn't a completely fruitless search. While walking, they encountered a crazy ant and were able to increase the development rate as well as gain a bit of mana. If they considered everything to be an experience, it was a useful combat training. However, Yong Ho's goal was to find Kaiwan's armory. In the game world, completing all the side quests and not the main quest was useless, so he told himself to not forget about his main goal, master. Catalina carefully spoke up. Yong Ho had an idea on why she called out to him, so he put on his calm expression and turned around. Yong Ho was the head of the household and was currently the leader of the search party. If Yong Ho looked anxious, then Catalina and Skull. He wasn't sure if Skull knew what being anxious felt like. Then most likely, they'll feel anxious too. I have a strong feeling it's this side. Let's go a bit further. Yes, sir. As the loyal spirit, Catalina answered right away. Skull had their usual blank expression and followed behind Yong Ho and Catalina. Yong Ho thought back to the time when he obtained Amon. He was really lucky to be able to obtain Amon. It was mind-blowing. However, the process wasn't easy. If Catalina didn't slow down the speed of their fall, they surely would have lost their lives. It could happen this time too. One of Mammon's spirit that's protecting the treasure could appear, or an unknown trap could appear as well. But he had no choice. Go this way. There's something there that will satisfy your greed. One room. Let's just go through one more room. If they don't find anything, Yong Ho was going to end the search here. He would try again after recovering their mana and stamina. After coming up with a plan, Yong Ho commanded the spirit of the dungeon to activate the next room. He carefully opened the door. Be careful, something feels off, like their warning. This room was different from the previous rooms. As soon as he opened the door, an eerie wind escaped. On top of that, the room was dark. Activated rooms are usually lit through the light that's created by mana. However, despite the fact that the spirit of the dungeon activated it, it was dark. It wasn't complete darkness, but the light didn't even light up a fourth of the room. Catalina Yong Ho spoke, and Catalina reacted. She took out the flashlight from her belt and handed it to Yong Ho Master. I'll take the lead. No, you stay behind me. I'll take the lead. It was the same as when he obtained Amon. The feeling was strong. He was certain that there was something here that excited Yong Ho's greed. I'm sorry. I'm unable to figure out the entire room. It's also too far from the heart of the dungeon. Some sort of power is interrupting it. The spirit of the dungeon spoke weakly. After Yong Ho gulped, he used the flashlight to light the room. It looked like an empty room since he didn't see anything. It seems like an extremely large room. It's as big as your room, Master. When they walked halfway across the room, Catalina spoke quietly. But Yong Ho couldn't reply to it. He had a strong feeling. Front. Something was behind this darkness. Yong Ho instinctively raised the flashlight. Once the flashlight lit the small light that was in the room, he was able to see the room more clearly. Mine entrance. He was sure that this large door would lead them underground. That's when Yong Ho sensed it. Greed started reacting to it, not because it was an armory gold mine. That was the only thing he could think of. Greed took place within Yong Ho's soul and was expressing their desire. However, that wasn't the only thing, Master. Her long ears flinched, and Catalina spoke softly. Yong Ho was able to feel it now. He heard something rustling in all directions. On top of that, something was falling from the ceiling. Skull. Even the slow-witted Skull was able to sense the danger. Catalina quickly took out her dagger and stood behind Yong Ho with her back facing his. With her dark elf eyes, she looked around. Yong-ho's grip on Armon tightened. He knew the moment he heard the sound. It didn't make sense that he didn't hear it once while coming here. It was the same for whatever was on the ceiling. Yong-ho didn't hesitate. He pointed Aemon towards the ceiling. Reveal it. As soon as he shouted, a green flame was released from the tip of Aemon's blade. The flame burned the slime that covered the ceiling, and the spirit of the dungeon answered to Yong-ho's yelling. After releasing the concentrated mana all at once, it got rid of the darkness that was in the room. Kia! Kia! A strange sound filled the room. At the same time, Skull was surprised. A group of crazy ants were covering the walls. The way they moved around while crying was horrendous, and the entrance. From there, a monster that has never seen before poked their head out. A group of soldier ants, who were at least 3 to 4 times larger than crazy ants, appeared. Retreat first, Yong-ho hastily shouted and swung Aemon once more. After releasing the fire in front of him, he quickly turned around and ran. Goldmine. It existed, just like Eligor mentioned. But the crazy ant built a nest at the gold mine. The monsters that drove out the owners from the previous generation were still alive and well. Skull, Skull. Skull started swinging around the hammer it was wielding. Most of the crazy ants that were on the walls stayed there, but they couldn't relax. They even covered the exit that the party was supposed to escape through. Ah! Catalina was running alongside Yong-ho when she suddenly screamed. The slimes that were releasing their fluids from the ceiling dropped down and enveloped Catalina with their bodies. Since it was a sudden attack, even the agile Catalina couldn't dodge it. The soldier ants penetrated through the fire. The crazy ants started moving around more, as if they received some sort of command. Skull, Skull. Skull threw their body towards the door. At the same time, Yong-ho turned around. He tightened his grip on Aemon and saw the slimes that covered Catalina. He didn't have time to think. It occurred to him, right when he saw it. The slime's body was made up of strong acid. It even melted weapons, so Catalina didn't have the time to endure it while being covered by their body. What could he do? In that moment, in between the opening, Yong-ho and Catalina made eye contact. Catalina spoke. She spoke with her eyes since she couldn't say what was on her mind. Run away, leave her. That was the best choice. This was her job anyways. Not only Catalina, but Yong-ho thought of that option as well. It felt like someone was giving a command. That moment disappeared. He felt the soldier ants approaching. He sensed the other slimes getting ready to fall to the ground. Because of that, Yong-ho made a choice. He didn't think anymore. He pierced Aemon into the slimes that covered Catalina. Aemon's fire not only burned their body, but their mana and soul as well. However, the same happened to Catalina. A green flame blossomed out of the tip of Aemon's blade. It started spreading and enveloped the slimes. During this, Catalina closed her eyes tightly. And Yong-ho was longing for it. He didn't throw away greed. He commanded Aemon. It was his. Everything about them belonged to Yong-ho. Amon's fire was greed's fire. The fire of desire that devoured the body and the soul. He burned the slimes. Yong-ho inserted his hand into Amon's strong fire. Catalina wasn't affected by Aemon's fire, and Yong-ho grabbed her. Go, Yong-ho commanded. After escaping the fire, Catalina listened to his command. Instead of thinking, she followed his orders and kicked off the ground. She threw her body towards the door that Skull left open. One more time, Yong-ho released more of his mana. He waved Aemon with all his might and filled the place with a wave of fire. Kaya. The soldier ants were surprised by the sudden wave of fire and started screaming. Yong-ho didn't bother to look and started running. He threw himself through the door and at the same time commanded the spirit of the dungeon, deactivating the room. It didn't stop there. Catalina quickly helped Yong-ho stand up. Skull, who was running through the room, opened the door again. Yong-ho ran through 2 rooms. At the same time, the spirit of the dungeon deactivated the room. And when they were running through the 3rd room, Yong-ho stopped and breathed heavily. His body was covered with sweat. Catalina, who almost died, collapsed to the floor. She remembered how Aemon's fire covered her, which made her wrap her shoulders with her hands. Yong-ho closed his eyes. He started thinking while catching his breath. The gold mine that Kaiwan found, it existed. There was gold remaining. Yong-ho's greed reacted, so he was sure. The issue was the colony of crazy ants that were blocking the way. Seeing the size of it, there's a high possibility that there's a queen ant. I should really find the armory, Yong-ho said it, and Skull reacted after opening the door to the third room. Catalina also raised her head and looked at Yong-ho. They found the gold mine. Thanks to that, there were 2 roads, and he was sure that one of them connected to the armory. If they walk down the remaining road, they'll arrive at the armory. They can obtain gear from the armory and reclaim the gold mine with stronger gear. But before that, Yong-ho stood up straight. He gathered the remaining mana into his left hand, which was empty. He activated the power of evolution and looked at himself. The demon of evolution. Chun Yong-ho development rate, 100 Ensero. It was the development rate that he obtained after taking care of the slimes that covered Catalina. Yong-ho didn't wait any longer. He placed his left hand on top of his chest, specialized mana development. The power of evolution started working. Green-colored mana rose out of Yong-ho's body as if something blew up inside him.